And we should be live.
All right. Well, I thank all of you for being here with us for an early evening on Saturday panel at the Coastal Magic Convention 2022 10th anniversary weekend. We obviously are not on the beach. We are in little teeny tiny computer boxes, but we are at least together at our little teeny tiny computer boxes. So that's a good thing. And we are going to talk about reading the other, which is encompassing all kinds of different underrepresented groups in fiction. And there are going to be some chats about what our lovely panelists write and maybe some of their favorites, stories that that spotlight some underrepresented characters in other books and TV and media and things like that. So that's going to be our chat. If you are watching on Continual, thank you for tuning in. Thank you to Continual for allowing us to spread a little bit of our coastal magicness over into their spaces. I do appreciate the opportunity to check in with some new people. If you're watching on the Coastal Magic page, thank you for tuning in as well. If you are watching and want to make comments, you are welcome to leave questions or comments in the comment spaces below the videos. I'm going to be watching for those. I promise I am not ignoring our panelists when I look away. I've got my phone off to the side so that I can see what the comments and questions are. So hopefully we won't miss anybody's information that they want to share or questions that they might have. Why don't I get us going for looking for questions while our panelists can tell us each a little bit about themselves, what they write, and if there are underrepresented characters in their groups represented in their stories, they can let us know about those characters and how they are, or what role they play in the stories. So how about we'll start with Nancy and then we'll move from there.
Thank you. I'm Nancy Northcott. I write historical fantasy for Falstaff Books. With Jeannie Adams, I co-write the Outcast Station science fiction mystery series. I also write paranormal romance and romantic suspense. And in Mage Sentinel, the book that's over my shoulder, I have a character who's blind. And I was privileged to have the brother of a friend of mine, who also was a friend of mine in college, help me with her. And that was a challenge. And I also had to figure out, okay, we've all heard the stories about how people's other senses develop more acutely. If you had magic, what would the effect of that be? And then the Outcast Station series, we have aliens who are definitely other, and we're about to play more off that. And I forgot to mention that in Warrior Mage, which will be out later this year, I have a character who's half Cherokee, and the research for that was very interesting.
Very cool. Very cool. All right. Sarah?
Hi. So I write young adult Sarah Nicholas, and then I write adult romance in several different subgenres under the name Aria Kane. I am queer in more than one way. I am non-binary, use they, them pronouns. And I have written, so Keeping a Secret is like a Disney Channel summer movie, but it's featuring two girls. So if you ever wish Disney Channel movies were more gay, that's your book. And then I also have chronic illness and several different classifications of neurodivergence. I haven't written those into a book yet, except for I've written a character with generalized anxiety that my agent is currently shopping, so it's not available yet.
Gotcha. Okay, and Tigress.
Tigress Eden / JK Rivers. I write in multi-genres. My JK Rivers is more sweet romance. All my characters and all my books across are diverse. They can be anywhere from African American to biracial to Asian, and then of course my newest love, Korean. So my latest book that comes out actually on Monday on my birthday, New Beginnings, features a African American who actually travels to South Korea and falls in love with a Korean. Did lots of research there. And then also too, in my paranormal series, I've got gay characters. I have characters that like inanimate objects, which I haven't introduced to you guys yet, but you guys get to read all about that in my next paranormal series, which is Blood Kissed. And I'll just tell you that he is hopelessly in love with an inanimate object. I'll just leave it at that. But yeah, a little bit of everything. Everything.
Very cool. Very cool. So let's start out basically with just the idea of what you obviously own voices is a thing. So
Right.
people writing books from their own personal experiences and personal status is a thing. But how do you do each of you write from that own voices standpoint? Or I know in particular for Nancy, you're not blind. So how do you, if you're not writing from an own voices standpoint, what do you do to be able to write characters who are in an underrepresented group that is not something that you have personal experience in your own self with? What do you do to be able to write that character authentically?
Oh, were you going to start with me? I didn't.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I'll start with you just
Okay,
because
sorry.
we know that you're not blind, and then you have a character who is blind, and you had mentioned a little bit about talking to someone. So how did that process work, and how did that help you be able to write her?
Well, she kind of walked onto the page in the book that comes after Mage Sentinel. She was the hero's sister. And I thought, just because you have magic, it doesn't mean that you don't have any other problems, that you can't be born with a physical issue that you have to deal with. And I did a lot of online research into adaptive devices for people who are blind. And then I remembered that my friend, who I actually roomed with for a while, had a brother who had gone blind. She mentioned he was blind before he was 30. And so she asked him if he would talk to me, and we did a FaceTime session where he showed me things like how you come up to a table and seat yourself at the table. And he showed me how to punch out my name in Braille and held it up to the lens. I mean, I was flabbergasted. I mean, he just said, "Here it is," and held it up there. And I'm like, "You're like right in front of the lens." So that was a huge help. The heroine is a runner, and he's a runner. And so I talked to him about, how do you stay lined up with the edge of the track if you're running on a track and you're blind? And so he explained that to me. And I was glad I had done it, because I learned a lot. And I'd like my characters to walk through a world that's kind of like the world I walk through. I have gay characters and I have Black characters, but I don't write the struggle for those, because I don't have that lived experience, and I am not fully confident that I could do it justice, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So in the Outcast Station series, we have aliens and other people who aren't, what we consider Earth standard humans. And I have gay people, and I have people of ethnic mixes, but I've kind of adopted the Star Trek philosophy of, it's a future where we all get along, or most of us get along, because I really hope that's what we're moving toward.
Right. Very cool. Sarah?
Yeah, so I think first, to even discuss Own Voices, I think we need to discuss why Own Voices started. And the reason why Own Voices started, which it was started by Coram Duvius, was because we were having the situation in publishing where people who were writing about the experience of being a marginalized identity, who did not have that experience, were being elevated over the people who did have that experience and were writing from that experience. And so I think that's important to remember when we're having these conversations, right? And to make sure that we're not still doing that. And so I try to mainly write Own Voices identities.
Gotcha.
unfortunately or unfortunately, depending on how you look at it, I have several of them. So there's that. But
I'm gonna say fortunately.
Yeah, fortunately.
But I do, so like in Keeping Her Secret, one of the characters is a person of color. But the setting is such that I'm not writing about the experience of being, a half Indian person. Right. So I don't think I would ever write, trying to explain the experience of being XYZ in a certain setting, right? So like I would never, of course, write a Black character in a story about police brutality, right? I could not understand that deeply enough to write that authentically.
Right.
So yeah, so I try to stick to own voices stuff. If I am writing something that is not, that a character that has an experience that I don't have, then I try to talk to the people that I know who are in that situation. I would seek out sensitivity readers, and it's important to note that you should pay sensitivity readers. Some people try to get them for free, and basically you're asking someone to like put their trauma out on display for you without, for free. So yeah, just make sure, because I saw a post the other day in this Facebook group. I'm not gonna name the Facebook group, but this person was like, hey, I'm writing a novel. Does anyone want to be a sensitivity reader? And I commented, I was like, what identity are you looking for a sensitivity reader for? They're like, well, the character's Black, but really, anyone who can like whatever. I was like, oh, okay. And then someone else commented like, hey, sensitivity readers are paid,
Right.
And like she just was so clueless. She did not get that at all. But yeah, so sensitivity reader should be for a specific experience, for a specific identity, and the sensitivity reader should belong to that group of people.
Is there a particular resource that you know of for people who would like to reach out to someone for, like with Nancy, she actually knew somebody personally. Do you know if there are any, do any of you know if there are any like resources for people who are looking to find someone to pay for this invaluable experience?
So the most comprehensive one that existed basically got shut down because the person managing it was getting harassed over it. Because there are people who think that sensitivity reading is censorship, which it's not. So there are a couple of places that list it. There are a couple like smaller companies that have editors, and then they also have sensitivity readers. And then there are people that just do it kind of freelance. So you can find some of them on Readsy, but there's not really like a one like centralized location to find that kind of thing. But they are out there. You just have to do a little bit of digging.
Miss Tigress.
Hello. So this is an interesting question, because yes, I do own voices. I can't say that I have personally put my stuff out there. I've probably done it in bits and pieces unconsciously, not knowing that that's what I was doing, because I can relate, obviously, right?
Right.
But I think on the spectrum of own voices and just writing, just from a Black experience per se, my upbringing wasn't that of what we see happening around or we hear about. My dad was in the military. I was raised in Germany. So my conflicts or my run-ins with racism, in all actuality, I was very ignorant to it for a very, very long time, and it wasn't because I was sheltered. It was because I didn't know, because I didn't experience it.
The community was different.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and the community that my father lived in, because we actually lived off base, was very diverse. We had Germans, we had Italians, we had Africans, we had Asians. I mean, there was a plethora of people that lived on the outskirts of this military base. And I'm assuming that they were too, whether it be military related or non-military related. My babysitter was Korean, right, in Germany, who has a Korean babysitter in Germany. So I didn't really get hit with that aspect of it until I came to the United States. And then even still, I don't want to say that it was sheltered, but it wasn't as prevalent as we see now, you know, and I get a lot of questions. Like, people are afraid to ask me, you know, ask me the question, right? I've had authors like inbox me and be like, so if I write about this, would you be offended? And I'm like, well, my opinion is going to be different from someone else's.
Right.
In my I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right words because I don't want to offend anybody. And that sounds funny, right? Because usually people are like, blah, 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 blah. But my
experiences are different.
My experience are different. I didn't even know that I should be offended when someone came to me and says, you sound like a white person. And it took me years to figure out why I should be offended, because basically they were telling me, oh, you sound educated, you shouldn't sound like that. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And so it took me a while to figure that out. So for me, my advice to other authors who even want to attempt to do the On Voices thing, say, you know, if Sarah or Nancy said, okay, I want to write a Black character and I want to convey the experiences that they may be having, don't be afraid to ask. Like, I mean, you can even ask me, because I have family that obviously didn't grow up how I grew up, and they can tell you all sorts of horror stories. And they can give you that in depth. And a lot of times that's where I get a lot of my stuff from. My Southern Contemporary series, Beauville, which is steeped in just things that happen in real life in my family, coming from being Black and dealing with colorism and dealing with, you know, passing. A lot of people didn't even know what that meant when I was like, yeah, my grandfather was passing. And they were like, what does that mean? I was like, well, he looked like a white man. And so everybody assumed he was a white man, and he allowed them to believe that. And he used that to his own, you know, to further his own self. I didn't know what that was for the longest time. I just thought my grandfather had blue eyes, and I was like, okay, well, hey, whatever's clever. But it's all about educating yourself. And I would stress now, and I don't know if this is necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, because there's a lot of sensitivity coming around now. This book, Shell told me, she goes, you know, you can't say that anymore, Tigress. You know, that's a sensitive issue. And I was like, really? Because I call somebody crazy? Like, that's sensitive? Like, everybody's taking things a little bit to the extreme nowadays. I feel like, you know, I had someone reach out to me and say, well, you can't say that your hair was corn braided. You have to say that it was locks. I don't get that. Like, when someone comes to me and tells me that, it's like, this is my body. This is my hair. These are my characters. If I want to say braids or cornrows versus locks, that's my own thing. So yeah, I'm like really just like, I'm baffled about a lot of the things that I see in the reader writer community and what's deemed safe and unsafe. I don't even remember the author, but I know it was a couple of months ago, and it might even been longer than that, because, you know, COVID's got my brain just all jacked up with the inside. But there was an author who was, I think she's Indian, but she grew up in like the Caribbean, and there are plantation houses, and she wrote a book, and someone like literally like slammed her because she brought up the fact about sugar canes and the plantation. And it was kind of like, how dare you write about sugar canes and plantations? Okay. And it's like, I messaged her. I was like, dude, no, write what you know. If that's what your life was and that's how you grew up, you need to express that. And I feel like we're all putting disclaimers, and it's like, for what? Am I making sense, you guys? Have I gone off on a tangent? I feel like I've gone off on a tangent. Like, why are we using these disclaimers, and why is everybody being so sensitive? Yes, we're in 2022, and I know that we haven't exactly come as far as we thought we have, just in light of all the recent stuff that's been happening around us. But I feel like people want to just slap something on it and call it censorship. No, it's not censorship. And I understand why people get sensitive. Like, this book here, there's a whole thing about miscarriage and stillbirth. That's going to be traumatic for some people, right? But it's not because I'm trying to hurt your feelings. It's because I'm trying to get you to understand the journey that my character had to go through in order to become who she is now. Because why else? I feel like we are numb to what we see on TV, but then we want to shout out when we read a book and we want to ban it. Like we see horrible things happening on TV every day. Why hasn't anybody banned the television yet? Because come on, you guys all know we see some pretty crazy crap on TV.
Right.
So yeah, I'll stop talking because I can go on and on and on and on and on. It's just mind-boggling to me.
Well, I'm gonna flip it a little bit right now because I've seen a lot of the panels in other places and even in Coastal Magic in years past, where when it comes to a discussion about underrepresented groups, rightfully so, there's a lot of negative because there's a lot of things where people are discriminated against and marginalized in many different ways, and all of these stigmas for things that shouldn't have stigmas. I would really love to hear any stories that you guys can recommend that have underrepresented groups, marginalized groups, stories that are told where the things that make these characters quote unquote different or other is really celebrated, and it's something special and it's something cool, and like the cultural differences between people are things that are really brought to light in a really positive way. If somebody's looking to read a book or watch a movie or see a TV show that has characters that are maybe not the traditional, white, completely sane, everybody's good kind of character, what do you suggest? Where would you tell somebody to look for stories and characters that are very positive in showing underrepresented groups? Anybody who has a suggestion, I'm not going to call on people. Just if you think of something, I would love to hear it.
I have to think about
Glass, the Love Con.
Pardon me?
Ceresia Glass, the Love Con. Her heroine is a Black nerd cosplayer. So that's an underrepresented group right there.
Yeah.
She's in an interracial romance, and she is a plus size woman. And
Gotcha.
Ceresia went, Ceresia and I share a love of conventions. I've never done cosplay, but she clearly did a lot of research into it. And there are a few comments in that book that I thought were really artfully done about what it's like to be a Black woman when a reality show producers, because the heroine's involved in a cosplay contest, it's kind of like Project Runway for nerds.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to cut it so she's the angry Black woman. And Ceresia addressed that. She didn't make a big deal of it. She dropped it in there and she moved on. But I noticed it because you never see a character deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really good book. And then there's a series, writing Amish characters in Amish societies has become trendy. But when this series started, it wasn't. And they're Linda Castillo's Kate Burkholder books. They're mystery / thriller. And Kate left the Amish world at the age of 18. And she's a sheriff in a county that has a big Amish population. And she's constantly having to go and talk to the Amish, some of whom won't talk to her because she's not one of them anymore. And yet it portrays the Amish culture in a positive light while not an adoring light. Does that make sense?
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any that they think are?
I mean, I have like 100. Like, how many do?
Well, let's go with 5. If there are 5,
let's go with my 5 most recent ones. Okay, so I read Red, White, and Whole by Rajani Laraka, who and that's a middle grade, and it's about an Indian girl who's content warning for parental death. It is really, really sad, but that was amazing. Sugar and Spite by Gil Villanueva is another middle grade. It takes place in the Philippines, and it's just it has some like class issues. There's like a rich girl and a poor girl, and Starfish by a lot of these are middle grade. I've been reading a lot of middle grade lately, but Starfish by Lisa Phipps is about a young girl like coming to terms with the fact that she's fat and not allowing people to treat her as lesser than because of it. City Beautiful by Aidan Paladoros is a young adult fantasy set in Chicago World's Fair in a very, very Jewish neighborhood. And that was a fraught time, right? To be a Jewish person in America. And then I'm skipping through, but like, I remember I was reading Beasts of Prey by Anna Gray, and Ayana's a friend of mine. And obviously it's a very Black joy kind of book, right? Like she said specifically she wanted to show people that Black kids could be magic, and there's purposely no racism in that book, because she just wanted it to be like a joyful book. But then I messaged her and I was like, does this character have OCD? And she's like, I didn't really write him that way, but like I definitely like consciously gave him some of these character traits, because I have OCPD, which is very similar and often misunderstood as OCD. But like some of his behaviors were like very similar to things that I do. And I was just like, I identify so closely with this 16-year-old Black male, because of these OCD behaviors and these anxieties that he has. And so that was really good. And I mean, it's a great book, and Ayana's a wonderful person too. So, I mean, I could go on forever. I'll do one last, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, which is about a trans boy brujo, and there's like gender affirming magic in that one, which is always great. And it's also just like really fun story.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Tigress, do you have any suggestions or recommendations for us?
All my feel-good books are super old. I've been but I don't know how people would like. So for me, it's going to be Alice Walker, The Color Purple, just because of just the struggle that Celie went through from beginning to end, her hardships with, again, advisory here, being raped by a man that she thought was her father. Turns out he's really not her father. Giving birth to 2 kids via that man, and then getting into a relationship with a very abusive man. It spoke to me, not just because I grew up in that type of environment. And when I say that, I don't mean that I was abused in any way. It's just people around me, it was prevalent. And in my family, our thing is always, we sweep things under the rug. It's not for anybody else to know about. You just kind of sweep it on and go. And her character, the growth that she experiences, the love, the loss, and then just finding herself all over again, and knowing that, even though everybody thought she was ugly, she's still beautiful. She's still a beautiful individual. So definitely The Color Purple for me is my go-to book, just because of all the struggles that she's had.
Gotcha.
Can I add one, Jennifer? When Sarah was talking, it reminded me of Jennifer Ashley's The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie. Okay. And Ian is autistic, but this is the 1800s. I think it's like the early Victorian period. I forget, but people weren't conversant with that then. That wasn't a thing. Mm-hmm. And Ian's father shipped him off to an asylum to be cured of this, which led to a lot of brutal treatments. His father died, his brother became the heir, and the first thing he did was go bring Ian home. But he doesn't make eye contact. He can't sustain a conversation. I was talking about this book on a convention panel a couple of years ago, and one of the other panelists said, "That is so accurate. My son is autistic, and that is so accurate." So it's a wonderful book. It hits all the feels, and it's a romance. It's Ian's romance. So just want to put that one out there too.
Oh, nice.
Excellent. There's a couple of people with some suggestions in the comments for books that have feature underrepresented groups and marginalized groups, but do it in a way that celebrates. And so we've got Jackie Lau, Beverly Jenkins, Farah Heron, Adriana Herrera. Let me see here. All of those are authors that have been mentioned in the comments. Somebody agrees with the idea with the Cemetery Boys recommendation. Somebody else agrees with the Color Purple recommendation. Let's see here. See if I don't want to miss anybody. Let's see here. No, that looks like everybody. Somebody else said that they're writing down. I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say I started the year with Amanda Gorman's "Call Us What We Carry," and it was so good. It was so. I listened to an audio, and I need to get it in print because like poetry is just really hard in audio because sometimes you just need to slow down and linger, right?
Right.
And so I need to get it in print, but it's so good.
She's brilliant. Somebody else is saying that they loved Lord Ian. So there's a second on that. And there was something else. I thought I saw something else that I was going to comment on, but it doesn't look like it. I must have gotten to everybody. Yeah, it looks like it. Okay, cool. All right. So my next question is, I have heard on panels past, and a lot of this is because I'm not from a marginalized group. So my view of this conversation is coming from somebody who is interested in expanding my reading universe. I know the world is not all people like me. So I want to read stories that have people that are, celebrating the things that makes them different. So I've been to a lot of panels, and I've seen a lot of panels where this is the discussion. And one of the things that I've heard authors say is that sometimes it's easier to have the discussion in a story or have the representation in a story in a way that people will accept. If you are doing something that's maybe like a paranormal story where you can introduce the idea of somebody who is not exactly like you as a different, like paranormal creature, and then you can address the idea of the different groups getting along in such a way that it's more of like a metaphor than coming straight out and saying we need these people to be equal, and kind of having people take that as a lesson or a lecture rather than a fantasy story. So do each of you think that there's merit to that idea of kind of skirting around the side and getting people to address those ideas and those situations in kind of a more fantasy type situation, or would you rather just go right to it and not disguise it in any way?
Honestly, I think that's a very like 60s mindset.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really old-fashioned mindset. I think especially gay people are tired of being represented by aliens. I think it's othering, it's dehumanizing, and yeah, I think it's an old-fashioned concept, and I don't think it is nearly as useful. And the reason why, though, and it was so popular in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, is to get around censorship laws. They weren't allowed to talk about gay people, so that's why they made them other kinds of creatures as an analogy,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't like it.
Okay.
I second what
that's why
said.
I asked the question. That's why I asked the question, because like I said, I'm coming at it from somebody who is seeing the conversations happen and not as someone who is affected by those decisions. You know what I mean? So that's the whole reason to ask that kind of question. So thank you. That is fantastic to know.
But I agree with what they've said, but I also think that not necessarily making the gay person an alien or the Black person different in some other way, putting something in a story can highlight it for people. Like my half Cherokee heroine was inspired in part because I've grown up in North Carolina. We went up to Cherokee when I was little, and I didn't learn a whole lot from that. I mean, it was a weekend trip that's fun, but it kind of stuck in my head. And when our son was small, we went up to the mountains and we took a ride on a steam engine. And one of the stops while they were waiting for us to pull into the station, there was a Native American mound in the field next to the train station. And they announced that on the PA system that it had been built by the Cherokee. And the guy behind us said, yeah, and then we shipped them all out to Oklahoma, in a tone about like that. And his girlfriend said, oh, I'm sure they were all compensated. And I said, oh, yeah, that's why they call it the Trail of Tears, because everybody was so well compensated and happy about it. So I put her in the story. It's not about the Trail of Tears, because there again, I don't have that lived experience. My family doesn't have that lived experience. But I wanted to make the point that this is a culture, it's an old culture with a lot of depth to it. And yet not everybody, because some of the Cherokee escaped and they're the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Nation now. But I do think I'm hoping that somebody who reads that will think twice and not make a stupid comment like, I'm sure they were compensated. Right. But that's different from writing a story about the struggle in a way that makes the character other. I mean, Tigress has referred to it as a journey. And, I would certainly agree that it's that. For me, from the outside looking in, it looks challenging. And I'm sorry to say I was an adult before I realized how challenging it really was for some people.
Right.
Yeah. I think in your case, I don't think that you're trying to introduce it in a way that would be considered as trying to just, kind of skirt the issue as a whole, so to speak. I think the way that you're trying to do it is just like you said, is to impart some knowledge and to have someone maybe think twice about it. But then back to what Aria was saying, making gays alien, or, making an alien purple instead of, right out calling them black, or so to speak. Those are the things that I don't agree with. And I'm the type of person in my books, and even in one of my paranormal books, I talk about the Atlantic slave trade and everything that person would have had to experience, being put on a boat, locked up in the gallows, and, being neck and neck, and all just the nitty gritty stuff of what happens. I wasn't there. I did the research, I can only imagine what that's like, and watching Roots or Queenie or anything like that isn't even going to compare, but I did do the research. And it's sad, and I wouldn't want to skirt the subject. I want it to be out there. And if someone doesn't like my book because of it, well, then don't read my book.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just how I feel. And like she said, they were doing that back then to skirt around the censorship and to get around it. Nowadays, don't be afraid to speak out. I mean, especially if it's knowledgeable. And I know it's a very fine line when I say don't be afraid to speak out, because there are some issues that are very, very sensitive that people don't want to, pick apart and open up and peel back the onion to expose it, because they're terrified of the backlash that they're going to receive. There's some topics that I don't even want to bring up, not because I'm terrified and not because I don't want to defend myself. It's because what my biggest thing is, not only do I not like confrontation, I know you guys are like, what? You don't like confrontation? No, I don't. But I'm also, it's hard for me to acknowledge when I've befriended someone that is not necessarily like-minded, but doesn't have that wherewithal or understanding to be like, oh, wait, but then they'll say something that's just like to the point to where you want to like choke them out. And then I don't want to do that. So I in a way, I kind of turn a blind eye and say, what, I'm not going to open that Pandora's box, because I'm not ready to know the people that I've surrounded myself with may not necessarily be team Tigress, so to speak. And I know that kind of sounds bad, but it's just, I want to avoid the confrontation as much as possible. I think I try to give everybody the opportunity to be that great person, but there's just some things that people are not in the know about. So instead of opening the box, I keep it closed for right now. Maybe one day.
Yeah. What are some things that you hope come through in your stories, or your characters, about those marginalized or underrepresented groups? What are some of the things that you hope readers learn about those characters in your stories?
That they're people too.
Yeah.
That they're human beings, that they're just like everybody else. It's really a shame that things are the way they are in an aspect, but I mean, we're all people, we're all human. We all have the same, physical makeups. There are slight differences, sure, but at the end of the day, we're human, we're people,
Right. Right. Absolutely.
I do find myself trying to kind of undo some of the damage that has been done. So like one of the biggest tropes that was really harmful for a long time for an entire generation of people is this concept that psychiatric medication turns you into a zombie. You're not the person that you are when you're on psychiatric medication. And because of that, a whole generation of people just avoided going on medicine that could really help them because they were afraid of turning into a zombie, right? And so I think it's important to have characters just casually taking antidepressants or whatever, right? And just like going about their life. Another thing is like, it happened literally 2 days ago where I said something about anxiety and someone was basically like, just don't be anxious. Like, that's not the way that it works. And so like,
No.
I tried to kind of like break some of those, stereotypes, like, oh, if you just thought happier thoughts, you'd be fine, yeah. So, but that's not what any of my stories are about. These are just like casual little like asides,
Right. Exactly.
So yeah.
Well, and
Well, go ahead, Nancy.
Sorry. I'd like people to recognize that people who may have who are differently abled or who have a challenge in some particular way are still capable people.
Yeah.
Right.
When I was in junior high school, I had to wear a brace for scoliosis, and it came up here. I mean, it was really, really conspicuous. And I got stared at a lot at a time in life where the thing that I wanted most was to blend in. And I've kind of never forgotten that. And it was sort of in the back of my head when I wrote Caroline, my blind character, because she doesn't like to be stared at. It's one of the things that she says in the book is she doesn't like to be stared at, and she can feel people staring at her. And I'd also like people to take away that from Audra, my Cherokee heroine, that just because we're different, we also have commonalities. Just because somebody's not exactly like me or like you or like Jack down the street, it doesn't mean that there aren't things we can have in common. And my dad grew up in the Philippines, and I didn't know much of anything about Filipino culture growing up until his brother and sister came to see him after he had a stroke. And his sister cooked Filipino food for us. And they brought this beautiful little jade tree. And there's this whole world of different cultural things that have their own beauty and their own merit. And maybe we should seek those out a little bit more.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I have we've got about 6 minutes before we start to wrap up. Sarah, you had said you had a long list of recommendations. I don't think any of us can have too many recommendations for really great books with underrepresented characters and marginalized characters. So why don't we get maybe 5 more, and then we'll wrap everybody up and call it a day. Because people in the comments are talking all about all of the different recommendations. So I want to try to get as many as we can out there. So let's do 5 more.
All right. I'm just going down my line. So Like a Sister by Kelly Garrett comes out March 8th. It's a mystery. It's about a girl she's a music mogul's daughter, and then her sister. So she is estranged from her father. Her sister was not estranged from her father, and was like a reality star. And she finds out from a newspaper headline that her sister's died. The last picture that she posted on Instagram was like of her in kind of a slip. And so the media, of course, starts painting this narrative that like she died in an overdose. That's what everyone thinks. Like no one's really investigating because they're just like, oh, it's just another, rich girl who died of an overdose, whatever. And it's really good. Kelly's amazing writer always. Iron Widow by Ziran J. Zhao. I know Laura is also a huge fan of Iron Widow. Love Iron Widow. So good. It's like a alternate Chinese history. It's they pitch it as oh my god, The Handmaid's Tale meets Pacific Rim, which like it's just an insane concept, but it's exactly what it is. Yeah, and then Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. It's very centered in Native mythology. It's kind of like more literary fantasy, I would say, but really good. Let's see. I'm like, oh, Bad Witch Burning by Jessica Lewis. It's a YA about a teenage necromancer.
Okay.
And I said Beats of Prey. Oh, The Wild Ones by Nafisa Azad. It was really good. It's really interesting. It's not, some of the narration is done in third person plural. So some of the narration is we. And it's a group of girls that were basically abused or abandoned by society and have been helped. It's hard to explain, but like basically a minor god has helped them, and so they live forever, and they work together. I mean, they like live together and they explore the world and just kind of like heal themselves, and so they are finally able to move on, like if they wanted to after they've healed themselves.
Very cool.
Yeah, Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Bully.
Cool.
Just won one of the biggest, I can't remember what one she just won, but that's a mystery set on a Native American reservation. Also, the author is just a total sweetheart.
Very nice. I do want to get Tigress's additional recommendations, but it looks like she's off scavenging to find them. So let's go to Nancy in case you have any additional recommendations, and we'll come back to Tigress.
Okay, I have one.
Okay.
I'm a comics track director for Continual. So I read a lot about comic books, and there's one called Bitterroot that's set in Harlem in the 1920s. And it's about a family of monster hunters who are Black. And if you read enough of it, you begin to realize that what's turning people, one of the things that's creating the monsters is racism. And it's a brilliant way to take that on without putting out a sign that says, this is about racism, woohoo, because there are a lot of people who won't touch it if you do that. But you get kind of caught up in the story, and then here it comes from the side.
Yeah.
It's really
that's what I was trying to ask earlier about approaching the discussion about including characters that are not, traditionally, mainstream characters from kind of a side door. So it sounds like that's what they're doing there. Tigress, you said you had another one?
Yeah, this one is a Vietnamese one, The Girl Who Kept Winter by Zhao Chi. It's YA, but it's intense and it's got a hefty dose of romance, but it's also got a lot of kung fu in it too, which is what I loved. This book actually reads like an action-packed movie. Like I would want to see this book put up on the big screen any day. And I know a lot of times people, especially when it comes to reading books like this, they kind of feel like it's going to be more fantasy based, and it is, but it isn't. It's just, I can't even talk enough good things about it. It's so good.
Fantastic. I love it. I am going to say, if there is anything else you would like to add to the conversation that we have not hit upon, this is your chance to do it. In addition to that, why don't you let people know what you may have had come out recently, what you may have coming up soon, any appearances you might be making, and where people can find out more about you and your books online. So any kind of closing comments and then information about you would be fantastic. Why don't we start with Tigress and we'll work our way around.
I'm not going to be anywhere else except here at Coastal Magic. This is probably going to be my only thing that I do this year, just because it's just been really hectic. But I do have a book coming out on Monday, which is New Beginnings, behind me. Ta-da!
That is a stunning cover. That's the cover?
Yes,
I managed to miss the cover. That is beautiful.
This is the cover. This is India. She's a twin, but she suffers a large blow with loss, and it's just about self-discovery, refining herself, and of course her new beginning. And it's a romance. It starts in Beauville, but then it moves over to South Korea. You guys all know I love South Korea, so I don't know what else to tell you about that. So there's a little bit of everything in there, but yes. Fantastic. And she is bisexual, so a lot of people, they find that out as they read that. But yes, she's the love of my life.
Nice. I'm going to go to Nancy next, but before we go to Nancy, there are just about every single person in the chat is saying, please make a comment that has these recommendations in it. So if you don't mind, ladies and lovely panelists, would you please take your list of recommendations and add it to our comments so that people were trying to, I saw somebody say that I can't write that fast because we're trying to write down authors and titles and weren't getting everybody. So if you have a minute or two, our commenters and readers would very much appreciate the recommendations in the comments so that they can go back and check these out. Okay, so Nancy, what's going on in Nancy world?
Well, my most recent release is Renegade Mage, which is part of the Light Mage Wars series. Mage Sentinel is out now, and Warrior Mage will be out later in the summer. I'm reissuing those that were previously published. Speaker for All will be out early this summer, and that's a first contact story I'm really excited about. And the concluding volume of the Boar King's Honor will be out this spring, King's Champion. Cool. You can find information about me at nancynorthcott.com. I'm most active on social media on Twitter, where I'm at Nancy Northcott. I probably spend more time there than is good for me. Mm-hmm. And I'll be live and in person at RavenCon and Con Carolinas. Oh, and I have a Rafflecopter giveaway in the chat, and I'll put it in the comments as well.
Fantastic. Yeah, we're going to give away your basket, and also Gail Z. Martin has a basket as well that we're going to give both of those away at the wrap-up chat at the end of tomorrow's panels.
Yeah, and it's posted on the page for authors and attendees too. Both of them are.
Right. Fantastic. Sarah?
Yeah, so you can find me online, sarahnicholas.com, Sarah_Nicholas on Twitter. And I would like to invite you all. So every Wednesday, me and my partner Bess do a virtual write-in at 8 p.m. every Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern. You don't have to write. Jen comes and works on her blog. Yep. People come and read, so whatever you can do in 20-minute spurts. I invite you to join us, and that's on my YouTube channel. So you can go to youtube.com/SarahNicholasYA and find us there. But I hope you'll join us because it's always a good time, and we have a really supportive community there.
Yes. Awesome. Yeah. It gives me a chance to actually focus on getting my blog stuff done. Yeah. Because I'm so easily distracted. So we do,
because we judge you if you don't work.
Yes. Yes. All right. I absolutely appreciate every single one of you for your thoughts and your opinions and your input and your education and your experiences and sharing all of those with us. If you have watched this panel and you have questions that I missed, I don't think I missed any questions, but if there are questions, or if you're watching it later, by all means, leave comments and questions in the comments, and hopefully we'll be able to get to those. And if you are still have some time, we do have more panels left later today and tomorrow, so you can catch the rest of our scheduling or the rest of our programming on YouTube and Facebook, and you can find out what is happening on the website. And we will see you in some of those later things. Thank you so much for joining us for this panel in our 10th anniversary of the Coastal Magic Convention.